Alright friends, welcome back again to another episode of Tactical Enlightenment. Maybe you just loaded up WARSAILS and you have some questions. We've all seen the amazing ship battles on YouTube, and I know you want to get out into that sweet and salty air with your lads, but there are several things you need to know first. In this episode, I'll cover what I have learned as one of the lucky few who's had access to the WARSAILS DLC for the past week or so, and in my 80 or so hours played, I've learned some really hard lessons. In this episode, we'll cover 7 critical things that you'll want to know about ships before you play WARSAILS or before you buy boats, and hopefully, my pound of mistakes will lead to an ounce of wisdom that helps you in your campaign. Let's get started. Alright friends, well, number 1 on the list begins with what is often referred to as the most important thing in many societies today, money. And I can't emphasize this enough. Do not buy a ship too early. In fact, especially don't buy multiple ships. If you've never heard of the acronym BOAT, stands for Break Out Another 1,000. That is true in real life and definitely true in Bannerlord, right, in WARSAILS. Ships are expensive. On top of that, you have to pay maintenance. Even more importantly, you don't just jump in your boat and start swimming around and collecting gold, right? It's not quite that easy. You're going to want to stick to the base game for quite a while. Now, how long, right? That's always a key question. And much like the advice for leaving the kingdom you're in and starting a new kingdom, right? Starting a new, taking your first city, the ideal time to begin to acquire boats really depends on your skill and experience level, and you can do serious damage to a campaign if you start running before you learn to jog. Like I said, ships are very expensive, and as a good rule of thumb, I would say don't buy any ships until you have at least 50,000 or 100,000 gold, and I would prefer even later. So we're talking clan tier 2, maybe even clan tier 3. Now, if you want to do a purely pirate run where you're running around attacking corsairs and sea raiders, perhaps you could buy a small skiff early on. But generally speaking, for the people who want to make a major impact and have an army in their ocean, in their ships out at sea, 150, 200 troops, I would wait until at least clan tier 2, probably 3, and 100k is a nice number to shoot for. Now, how expensive are some of the ships, right? The most expensive ships can be upwards of 150,000 for one ship, right? Just like the beautiful yachts down at the local marina where you are. I'm sure the guys in Texas are like, huh? The marina? Just like those giant yachts, ships are very expensive, and the very cheapest ships, skiffs that can handle maybe 20 to 30 troops on them, generally run at least 12,000, and there are regular maintenance costs. You can think of the maintenance costs kind of the same way that we view troop upkeep. Your ship's out in the water, it's getting beat up, you got to put more varnish on it or whatever the heck chemical, whale oil back then. You've got to pay this on a regular basis, otherwise your ships will start to deteriorate. So number 1, do yourself a favor and wait a little bit for ships in your campaign. If you're just dying to get shipboard action, use the custom battle menu. You can actually have gigantic battles with ships in the custom battle menu. I would get your itch on that way, and it's also a great place to learn, right? I would advise everybody to do some practice with ships. It's complicated. There are sails, there are oars. We will cover that a little bit at the end of this episode, but ultimately you need to practice if you're going to have some success. Otherwise, those sea raiders may be adding your ship to their fleet. All right, let's move to number 2. Well, number 2 was mentioned and hinted somewhat in number 1, and that is you don't just hit the water, ram some poor opponent's ship, and collect all the loot and live happily ever after. The ocean is vast. Even in the shrunken scope of Calradia, the oceans are a little bit like a haystack, and the enemy ships the proverbial needle. I went 15 hours in one campaign looking for a battle before I found a good one. Part of this is because on land you are often funneled by mountains, bridges, and water, and you are inevitably going to bump into enemy forces. On water, you can be right outside the view of a huge fleet and may not know it until they arrive at your city. All of that is to say, while hunting down sea raiders or enemy merchant skiffs is pretty easy, just don't expect to hit the open seas and have a smorgasbord of huge climactic battles. Just like real life and historical naval battles, they are likely to be very impactful, but also very rare, something to keep in mind. Number 3, regardless of what she says, size does matter. Now in shipboard battles, the size of your boat determines everything from the capacity of troops and goods it can carry to the size and power of the ram. And these factors can be profoundly impactful both in the campaign map and the actual battle. Small boats can't even ram at all, and most of them are used to harass larger boats with arrow and skirmisher fire. See point number 5. While if large shipboard battles are rare, having massive battles where you have the right conditions to ram, the right ships on your side, and the right enemy opportunities are going to be even more rare. And that brings us to number 4, and this is critical for size. If size is important, so is the motion of your ocean. In actuality, the currents of the water don't play a factor in Bannerlord, but the wind's strength and direction is enormously powerful. We'll cover this later in a tutorial and explain how to use the 2 types of sails, as well as the oars, but fighting any battle where you are downwind of your enemy, especially in a close battle, is a lot like fighting deep in a valley against a strong opponent hemming you in from the high ground. It's probably not going to go well. An understanding of the winds will be essential for your success at sea, whether you have a tiny fishing skiff or a massive armada. Number 5. We mentioned this earlier, and ranged weapons dominate in Bannerlord. Well, they dominate in the open field, as we demonstrate on the channel all the time, and it's especially true on the seas. While sea condition can vary and some battles are chaotic, ranged weapons, especially skirmishers, are hugely powerful in naval combat. Ships often get snarled on each other, and with new and improved accuracy of archers and skirmishers, one simple but effective strategy will be to keep your boats near your enemy, but try to avoid letting them board you. This will take practice, but ultimately, with a good understanding of the sails and oars, you should be able to manipulate your crews, the wind condition, and the hordes of enemy ships into a favorable position to just rake your enemy with broadsides. Now, ammo is not unlimited and your archers can run out of arrows, but there are upgrades you can make to your ships at port and even refillable locations for your main character. Ironically, this means it's going to be especially hard for the Nords to thrive at sea combat, and I've already had several custom and even a few actual battles and campaigns where we demolished Nord forces despite being outnumbered 2-to-1 or worse. Savvy tactics, ranged weapons, and an understanding of your boat and weather conditions is going to allow you to be a dominant force at sea. Number 6 is to plan your character and companions. As Sun Tzu said, all wars are decided before they are fought. What he is referring to, of course, is preparation. Now, at the outset of a campaign, you get to choose your culture, and if you choose the Nords, so this is new, they move better on their boats in rivers and coastal areas, and they get more loot when they sack villages and caravans. However, they move poorly into the interior of the land, losing energy almost like a hurricane. Now you'll notice at the bottom when you start a new campaign there are new skills. These skills we're still basically learning, and I'll get to those in a second. However, when you build your character, these choices you need to make are very important, and you have to make big decisions early on. At the bottom, there are new essentially skills that you can choose and benefit your character by selecting what is essentially the story of your character. Where he came from, what kind of life experiences he has gained. These selections, sailors, shipwrights, etc. at the bottom of these screens when you build your character will help you become better at various different skills in the ocean. The conundrum here, just like the guy with his finger on his chin, is that a lot of these skills are going to be used on a relatively rare basis, whereas some of the other skills like commanding an army or swinging your axe are going to be used on land quite a bit more. Unless they make alterations to how frequent battles happen on the sea, this is a real difficult decision, and although I skipped this in one campaign and did a mostly melee character, he was terrible on the ocean, and I ended up having some real problems commanding ships and having large armies on the sea. Now, after you make your character, you'll be taken to the main screen where you can look a little bit closer at the skills, and let's talk about those skills now. There's 3 of them, and there's been a lot of confusion about what attribute point affects them. As you can see, there's nothing to the left of Mariner there. Well, what it is, this is a combination of your various different attributes. Now, the Mariner skills, the easiest way to think of Mariner skill is fighting skills on the water. Your character will move a lot faster, swing his weapon faster, shoot his weapon more accurately with Mariner skill. Shipmaster is sort of hard to explain. It's basically a variety of different benefits, everything from increased morale for your ship to less time after a raid where your army is disorganized. Similarly, bosun is also confusing. There's a variety of different skills that fall under bosun, and it can be quite complicated even for me to describe. Let's tie the attribute points though. Vigor and endurance affects Mariner. Intelligence and social affects bosun. And finally, Shipmaster is governed by how much control and cunning. It's an average of those 2, and then however many focus points you happen to put into your character. That will affect the learning rate and how much skill that character gains when they do various tasks, either in the campaign map or on the battlefield. All right, the last thing you need to know about naval combat is that you are more than one person, or more exactly, you can make an impact far greater than your one person on the ship. We're going to talk about commander and master of the field here, right? We're going to help you with some basics, and then from there you can extrapolate a battle plan to crush your enemy. Now we've got a scenario here where it's the NORDS. We have the NORDS against the Kazate. We're outnumbered in ships, but we have a slightly better, more powerful ship here. We're not going to fight the whole battle. This is mostly going to be to understand the naval system, to understand your boat, the helm, the wind, oars, etc. We've got kind of a mild windy situation. We'll do some random winds here, and we will jump into the battle screen. Now, just like the battlefield on land, at the beginning, you're given a chance to set up, but this is not super critical. Now, you don't have a huge amount of control over where your ships go. You can't turn them left and right and stuff like that. You can, however, decide what troops are on what ship, and I think that is important. Ultimately, your strategy will vary. You can come by our channel, though, and we're going to have plentiful tactical videos of things that you can try that will lead you to more success. What I prefer is having a large ship with mostly archers on it, maybe a little bit of infantry. That way we can have a couple boats that are more standard infantry. They will be boarding ships, right? They will be offensive troops. Meanwhile, we will try to ram and shoot the enemy with all of our archers. I also like to have 1 or 2 more boats that has archers that follows me, just sort of as an auxiliary wing of archers. On this boat, this is going to be our infantry boat. You can get down and inspect your troops before the battle starts. Now here is a big clue, right? We have the wind actually displayed not only on the white cap of the waves moving across the bow of our ship, but also these little flags. It's remarkable how they've really made the system intuitive. If you've done anything on the water in your life, you'll see and sort of remember a lot of effects that you're used to. Right now we're going to try to sweep around in a big counterclockwise motion here and commit to a ram. We also want to talk about the troops here, right? Let's look at this real quick. You see how it says 33 infantry, 47 archers, 40 in reserve? See that little gray bar beneath the orange? That is how many archers, infantry we have, and then there are units basically just milling about underneath our boat, or more accurately inside our boat. Those guys are ready to come up when some guys on the top of the ship get killed. You cannot bring more ships into a battlefield. What you start with is all you have. In other words, if you have 16 ships, you only get 8 on the battlefield. All right, so our men are rowing. I'm at the helm. You can leave the helm. However, if you leave the helm, they will stop rowing. So you want to stay there most of the time. Now you also control whether or not all of them row, half of them row, or none of them row. And why would you want that? Well, if they were archers, you might want them to not row so they will shoot, right? If they're infantry, of course, it's probably better that they're rowing, because in this case, we're actually going to go into the wind. I'm turning up into the wind, and that is a tactical decision because I want to ride down the wind when we're close to the enemy. So let me just draw it out for you. You see the wind is blowing from our right to our left. We're going to go up into the wind almost like a hill. We're going to climb the hill first so that we can slide down the hill into the enemy. You don't want to go up the wind while the enemy's attacking and shooting you. You want to go down the wind when the enemy's trying to attack you, right? That way you have the ability to move away from them if you want, or do what we're going to do, right? And do some penetration of their ship, right? We're going to try to do some violence with this boat. Now you can see I can move around and the boat just sits here. The oars don't move. You want to make sure you're at the helm. This is why it's so important to command. Now you can tell your ships where to go, right? You can click on a boat and actually point out there. That did not work with early patches, but it now works. You can actually tell your ships exactly where you want them to go. You can't, there's no formations. You can't tell them to rotate or anything like that, at least not yet. But at least now you can tell your ships exactly where to go. So you know what we're going to do, fellas. Kill boxes are incoming. We're going to be doing some surrounding of the enemy with archers. We'll probably be doing some very complex tactics. Now let's talk about the wind gauge in the lower right here, right? We have the wind blowing down there, right? And in the lower right corner of the menu, you get a strange looking little wind gauge, right? We want to go down this wind into the enemy. Well, when it's in the red, it means you're going into the wind, as you can also see from these flags, right? In fact, let's send this third boat to engage. Engage is kind of like skirmish. They will try to stay at range and shoot the enemy. They won't go directly into melee. What we're going to do is start turning our boat here into the wind, right? And the compass, you can actually see it's starting to move into the green there. The brightest green, that next patch, is where you want to let your sails down. Now you can't let down one sail at a time. It's both. It's either both or none. However, you can raise one at a time, right? So you can lower the square and the Latin sail at the same time, or you can raise the square sail. Now the Latin sail has more variability to it. It hits it basically, the wind will power your boat in a wider degree of windy situations with the Latin sail, but the square sail is if you want to do speed, right? We are going to slam the shit out of this Khazate ship. Let's see, we're going to pick one of these. We're picking up speed now. You can actually see we're directly in the biggest spot. We've got someone on a fire catapult flaming them, and we're about to penetrate the crap out of this boat. In fact, we're like riding up on top of it. I won't be surprised if it sinks. We're practically on top of this other boat, and that's a nice overall tutorial here as this Khazate force gets sent down into the water. Those guys should be drowning, dying left and right. Of course, troops do drown, and there's a nice little tutorial for you. We are going to wrap up this episode. I appreciate you, friends, for swinging by the channel. We're going to have a lot more naval tactics here as we pile drive this Khazate boat. If you want to see more, now's the time to subscribe. Please hit that like button on the way out, friends, and I will see you next time.